are a nonprofit organization that works to protect and improve the health of the Gallatin River. We work from Yellowstone National Park downstream through the canyon and stop at the valley there. We use credible scientific data to inform all of our project work. So whether it's a restoration project that we're working on to reduce erosion or nutrients, or an educational event that we are trying to educate folks about a particular water issue, or this project here, we really rely on scientific data to inform our decisions and our priorities. And so the Gallatin Canyon is serviced by septic systems for their wastewater treatment. And septic systems do not treat wastewater near to the level that a centralized treatment system would do. And in fact, the Big Sky Water and Sewer District, the new treatment plants that they are planning for, will remove 99% more bacteria and 90% more nitrogen and phosphorus than a typical septic system does. So the impetus for the study really started with the Big Sky Sustainable Watershed Stewardship Plan. And this plan was developed by 35 stakeholders representing different entities in the community with diverse interests. We had regional and local conservation groups. We had developers, local businesses, state and local government. In fact, many of you that participated in that process are here in this room, and I'd love for you to raise your hand just so we can see all of you that participated in developing this watershed stewardship plan. Thank you all again. To push forward the initiatives that were in this plan, we developed what we're calling the Headwater North. And that's a committee structure that our partner organizations are working together to push forward those initiatives within that plan. One of those initiatives is addressing septic systems in the Gallatin Canyon. Because of the reasons that I spoke of before, they just don't treat water to the level that centralized treatment can treat water to. And these septic systems, they release their wastewater effluent into a shallow alluvial groundwater aquifer. And that aquifer is a public drinking water supply for many of the residents in the canyon. It also feeds stream water flows in the Gallatin. And we know that the Gallatin is sensitive to pollution, as we saw with the algae bloom that we saw in 2018. And that was caused by, I think, warmer temperatures as well as nutrient loading. So we're really trying to reduce that nutrient loading, which could happen if we improve wastewater treatment in the canyon. So we received funding from the Big Sky Resort Tax to conduct the study that you're going to learn about today. And we hired 2 engineering consulting firms, AE2S and WGM out of Bozeman. We also hired Karen Filipovich over here, who has helped facilitate and coordinate the process. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mace Mangold, who is from WGM, and he is going to start the presentation. Oh, and the format for tonight, there will be 3 segments, and there will be Q&A in between each of the segments.
Okay. Like Chris said, Mace Mangold, WGM Group. I got Scott Bucher right next to me. We're going to take team this in thirds. I'm going to lead into kind of the general overview of what we've worked on so far. This is a feasibility study, so we're looking at really high-level solutions, yet looking at specific areas where we're putting feasible solutions on paper in conceptual locations. So when you get to the end and you see our design scenarios, and if you got a drain field on your property that irks you because we didn't contact you, just recognize we're showing solutions to disposal, collection, treatment, and disposal, and this is kind of that first step of evaluating feasibility with future steps to refine locations and engineering. Study components, we're looking at existing conditions, really assessing the existing nutrient load, a little bit of water quality assessment to inform potential benefits, pros, cons of certain disposal types, defining a boundary. Where are the big loads? What's the reasonable collection limits to form a district around and develop central collection? Then ultimately a range of options for collection, treatment, and disposal. We translate those options into two specific scenarios that we're going to present today and identify the infrastructure to facilitate those collection, treatment, and disposal scenarios and put dollars and cents to them. Ultimately, this informs a conceptual rate study that will translate to what it is to the end user. So today, we're working with high-level capital costs to kind of show solutions and potential scale of costs to inform maybe a future district. Study area. We are building off a 2008 study that was performed by Dow HKM, looking at a similar situation, evaluating it from a few different perspectives, but we wanted to build off of their findings. So we kept with the same study boundary, and it had a lot of merits in terms of where the loads were and land space, but we will zoom into a specific district area recommendation for our planning. Study purpose and need. Right now there's north of 100 septic systems sending effluent into the ground, and that's the primary drinking water source, actually the only drinking water source in this canyon area. Some are in the deeper aquifer that aren't as prone, but a lot of them are shallow aquifer public water wells that are compromised based on septic loads. Reduce the existing nutrient load to the aquifer, which translates to improved Gallatin River water quality, and with growth, establish a better long-term water management to mitigate that future risk. I will circle back to our district boundary recommendations, but I'm going to keep it at the high level for now. The land use aspect of this, the main reason I'm presenting these stats is to show the nature of existing development. We had residential parcels at 262 covering 1,064 acres. That's roughly 1 per 4 acres, so very low density. The other stat I want to emphasize is this raw land. There's 4 large parcels totaling 575 acres. The reason I bring those out is for comprehensive high density development, it's really those raw land opportunities that can kind of facilitate a smarter growth strategy, where these 262 parcels, if they're already divvied up, the opportunity for best use of lands and water conservation and mitigating or reducing sprawl, those opportunities tend to go by the wayside once they're subdivided and dissipated. Permitted systems, we took an inventory of Gallatin County database, had 62 permits at 113,000 GPD. They let us know that they probably didn't have everything. They did have the big systems, the community systems, and I'd say 90% of the flows and loads are probably in 10% of the systems. So their database had the big ones, but we did some ground truthing through primarily aerial imagery to up that to 125 total systems, up to about 115,000 GPD flow. Based on average day flow and load estimates for those, we're calculating about 4,600 pounds per year nitrogen going to the aquifer. I bring up this unincorporated development pattern. What we're here today to do is really recommend a district with an unincorporated development or area. You really end up with development sprawl, and that's because combination of water rights and sewer regulations. Water rights to build a home, to do a development, you're largely working with exempt wells up here, which can't facilitate high density growth, and sewer just multiplies that challenge in terms of having to navigate through standalone off single septic systems. So your density really starts to fall, and smart growth starts to not be an option. This is building off that 4,600 pounds I mentioned to you before. We're kind of throwing an air bar of about 1,000 pounds per year, saying might be as low as 3,600, might be as high as 5,600. I'm getting a 5-minute and I need to cruise. Recognizing there's a lot that goes on in the aquifer. There's denitrification, there's dilution, there's aspects that may drive that number down, but there's also loading aspects of systems performing poorly that could drive that 4,600 number up. So we've got an average day flow on those permitted systems estimated about 97,250 GPM. Existing load, and what we're here today is look at ways to reduce that load, ideally cut it in half or more. Under a projected 20-year build out, again, this is unincorporated, so we looked at water rights and how that really limits your max growth potential. There's still substantial growth potential, but we calculated about a cap at I think it was 276 GPD of growth, so double to triple the potential of existing conditions, but recognizing that water rights do represent a fundamental cap in this canyon. In my interpretation, unless water right regulations change in the future, or if we get creative about how to navigate it. But under an unincorporated growth scenario, you're looking at upwards of 12,000 pounds of septic systems going to the aquifer. Whereas in the central treatment, you can handle that growth and ideally mitigate to below existing loading. So this is a spatial representation of existing conditions versus projected growth. These yellow areas represent your warmer effluent concentrations, usually coming out of your central or your community systems. For example, Ophir High School here has a large system. And then on the right hand, that's a projected load of roughly tripling population. You see that heat map start to increase. I've got that in another form here. I'm just curious how it presents. You can kind of see existing conditions, future build out, that load to the aquifer. It does dissipate and dilute in the aquifer, but a lot of that load stays and exists and ultimately does make it to the river. So growth projection. This growth projection serves as kind of our basis of design for infrastructure. Permitted flows, as I mentioned, roughly 115,000 GPD. We looked at various metrics for growth. The 2008 study identified X number of permits at X GPD, and we compared that to present day. And based on a permitted situation, 3.8% growth in the canyon area. Looking at Big Sky Water and Sewer District stats, their last 5 years showed about 7% growth on an SFE basis, single family equivalent. On a flow coming out of their plant, they're showing about 5% growth, so 5% flow growth. So we landed on a design flow using a 20-year projection, going 5% off of the permitted flow. I would argue that permitted flow is roughly a max day estimate, so we're conservative on our base because that's kind of a larger number than average day. That said, with additional collection, we're going to get additional I&I, so that contributes to both collection system capacity and plant capacity limitations. And we also know that there's a lot of near-term development on the horizon that could generate 10-20% growth in short spurts. So we landed on that as a design capacity. Boundary delineation, we identified high existing loaded areas. I don't know if I've got to zoom into that. Yeah, I do. And potential of central collection at about the intersection of 191 and 64 of a good area to gravity drain and or gravity collect and provide treatment. We identified some raw land areas that have some near-term development planned. And again, we're trying to grab some of the larger existing loaders. Red area generally shows where either near-term or existing loads are concentrated. And it's balance of cost of collection versus how much you're pulling out. And that's kind of our basis for that preliminary district boundary recommendation. From there, I'm going to introduce two scenarios that Scott will elaborate on. Scenario one is really a go-it-alone scenario, a canyon treatment plant somewhere in the north end of this zone. Scenario two, I call that the co-solution with Big Sky, the existing Big Sky district. And the strategy there is the sum might be greater than the parts. They've got existing plant, they've got existing storage, they don't have great disposal options, but they have excellent treatment. So that plant, those benefits potentially create a win-win solution. I think I am ready for our first set of questions.
Great, so we're going to take questions after each section. As May said, he's going to take it. We're just going to do this for a few minutes, but there'll be more opportunities at the end to stand around, talk with it, look at the maps. Thanks, Mace. You want to take it?
Yeah, and if there's no question, I'll move. But go ahead.
I'm just wondering, because it's not clear on the map, where you project the southern end of the boundary will be for the
So again, we're kind of identifying This is showing projected loads on a 20-year growth, but we do know on our existing loading map, the Ramshorn subdivision has a notable density. They're actually the higher density development area for residential. Some existing commercial loads, old septic systems along the east side of Highway 191. But right now, that's kind of our phase one concept boundary, but planning for in the future having adequate collection to extend that boundary to, say, we're showing phase two down at Ophir School, recognizing that the school is growing at a rapid pace, and that'd be a logical phase two, or even rolling into phase one if the dollars make sense.
And Mace, can you restate questions? Otherwise it won't record.
Okay. On the next one.
So where on the map is Ramshorn?
Ramshorn is this service area now.
And what about the disposal issue that you mentioned?
That's essentially the third section of our presentation. So we'll have more details there. Sorry for not repeating the question. That's going to be tough.
So where exactly would the proposed plant be?
We're identifying the northern half of this phase one boundary as ideal from a collection standpoint and ideal from potentially a lift station to the Big Sky District wastewater plant.
And so where is the 64, whatever, the road that goes up to Big Sky?
It's right here. So little landmark, Lone Mountain Road to Big Sky, the Conoco. This represents roughly the Bighorn Center at the edge of that phase one boundary. We're standing here in Bucks T4 at service area 8. And we have more figures that have those landmarks and infrastructure to get oriented.
So, I got another question.
Okay, one more, and then we'll see if we've got anything else. If you could restate Mace.
Okay.
Okay, so how did you get your growth projections? I mean, in terms of development is the big one.
Question is growth projections. Under an unincorporated mechanism like it is today, looking at the stats from 2008 in the previous report, that's where we see on a permitted basis 3.8%. So 10 years of duration, back calculating what those permitted systems are today versus then, and we land on that number. We're on looking at the existing district as potentially representative growth for a district type system. We're seeing higher growth rates. And I tend to like this flow rate basis better than the SFE basis, because SFE is just another kind of error bar for calculating that growth. So looking at trends in existing district flow rates. And granted, we recognize that growth could be a bigger number, but we do feel that we're working off a conservative base estimate that might have 20% conservancy in it. So, Brent.
So is this a confined bedrock aquifer?
So question on the aquifer. So it's a shallow but large aquifer. Bedrock starts to daylight or be shallower towards the north end of the valley. It gets broader and slightly deeper as you work south towards, would be about Bucks Ridge here, but then it thins out again. But in the center of that map is, I'm going off memory, about 40 feet deep of alluvial aquifer.
So that nitrate goes down, hits the bedrock, and travels to the ground.
Yep, it's a solid aquifer. It's better than the aquifer up in the West Fork. I'd say it's upwards of 5 times the size and probably more recharge. And MBMG is doing a very thorough study. I think it's a 3-year study with substantial data collection that will enlighten this whole process. But it's a 3-year effort. We did a kind of a 3-month first cut on some of these analyses. So. Steve.
Just with regard to growth, your introduction identified that the likely cap on growth is going to be the availability of water supply and water rights.
Yes.
So this growth is not going to go on forever.
Yeah, and that's worth elaborating on. Water rights as a potential growth cap. the previous study landed on some very large numbers, which turned into large infrastructure costs. When you look at the capacity for growth on a water rights basis, that capacity is, it's tough to put a number on it, but I'd put it at roughly 3 times what it is today as a nice round summary. And that is because this is a closed basin. To pull senior water rights from Bozeman, the Gallatin Valley upstream to here is darn near impossible, is what I've learned from our water rights group. And we do have a tech memo that's coming out in, I'd say, 2-3 weeks that gives some background of why water rights fundamentally will be a development cap in at least the 20-year timeline. I don't know if water rights regs will change in 20 years, but I do see it as a development cap. Guy.
Great follow-up on growth cap. Steve just asked a question about whether or not your water rights are going to be your actual cap, but what modeling, if any, have you done about what the river really needs to remain healthy? The current assumption is right now the river needs to have less pollution than we're getting in there.
Yep.
I think tangentially we understand the idea of if we remove a certain amount of pollution that's currently getting in at lesser levels, and then theoretically you can get more water coming down that's been highly treated. But have you actually modeled that, and have you done that kind of modeling to demonstrate what could be the appropriate cap? What would that look like?
To model a threshold of where the Gallatin is at substantial risk is definitely beyond this scope. I'd even argue it's probably beyond MBMG's 3-year scope. That's a complex dynamic. My logic for this situation is we're looking at trying to pull existing load out of the system. You saw that 4,600 line. If we can cut that in half or 90%, we're now pulling that down, and we kind of have this existing condition as at least a benchmark of the Gallatin River can process a good chunk of that load. Whether we're at a tipping point, I don't know, but pulling existing load out will protect against future impacts and allow future growth to not overcome the existing threshold. Steve, last question, Steve.
But at that 4,600 pounds of load, we are already seeing signs of impairment.
Yes, Christian mentioned some algae blooms, and so we might be at that tipping point. I can't put a number on or speak to whether I think we're right on it or if there's buffer. Rivers can process nutrients, but they can also hit a tipping point where it's tough to turn back. Yeah. So that's transition to Scott's. I'm a map guy. Scott's a table guy, so be ready for it.
That's not fair. Maps are way more fun than tables, but I'm going to drag you through some infrastructure costs, and I want to talk a little bit about cost estimation beforehand, but just to reiterate, largely when you see our report, when you see our presentations, and just want to say quickly, we'll give another one of these in early April where we'll take these infrastructure costs and these O&M&R costs that we're going to show you tonight and try to develop into something real for you, which would mean connection costs, annexation costs, and what does it mean for you. So these costs are going to be for the total project and somewhat difficult to wrap your head around what does that mean for me if I want to join the district. But 2 scenarios. Scenario 1 is going to be go it alone, as Mace said. Think about that as one man against the world. Scenario 2 is joining, coupling with the district and pumping your wastewater up there. So just that'll ride throughout this presentation. Cost estimation. So I'm talking, when I give you numbers, they'll be total project costs. So not just construction costs, but also the cost to design it, to permit it, construction admin, the whole 9 yards. So just when we say total project cost, that's what we mean, versus when we say construction cost, that's the cost you'd expect to see on a bid day. Accuracy, we're operating under the American Association of Cost Engineering. It's sort of a standardization of when we talk about cost estimation. And I'll show you this table that we're at what we call a level 4, a feasibility level, where we're not doing concrete takeoffs. We're doing parametrics, looking at other projects, recent projects that have been built. We are getting budgetary cost proposals from manufacturers of equipment at times when it makes sense. level 4 AAC standard would be, you could stand up here and say, well, that allows me to say that my cost estimates are accurate to minus 30% or plus 50%. That's always been a hard pill for a client to swallow. We try to do a little bit better than that. In the report currently, we're saying we're at minus 25 plus 35% right now. And as time goes on, we're able to get more accurate, which is what the bars on the right are showing. This graph is just showing your cost estimation band with as you progress through design. So we're in these early stages here with about 15%. So our band is still pretty wide. The goal will be, if this project has legs, we'll go into a next phase, which would likely be a preliminary engineering report for DEQ submittal for funding application, et cetera. And we'll hone that in and get more accurate as we go, with the ultimate goal being when we're actually putting projects out to bid that we might be plus or minus 10%. So this is all just saying, you got to be patient with this process. It's not meant to protect the engineer, it's meant to protect the client from marching into a project that they may not be able to afford. This is where we would be in the next phase, if we get to that point, if this does have legs, if the vote on May 5th is successful, for example, then we'll be able to start honing this in with better design applications for additional funding sources. This is all, large infrastructure that you're not going to finance with cash. You're going to go out and get a 20, 30, sometimes 40-year notes on these projects and finance them. And forming a district gives you that capability. If you don't form a district, you can't get it that money. So with that, just high-level view, this is all going to be in the report if anybody's interested in the dirty details. But canyon area collection system, roughly from about 1,000 feet north of 64 to capture Bighorn Center, with collection mains on both sides of 191, coming to a lift station somewhere in that vicinity of Bighorn Center, pumping underneath the West Fork through a bore and catching it on the the south side of 64. From there all the way up to Ramshorn and Ophir School District, we can do gravity. So, somebody asked about location of the treatment plant. Ideally, it would be around that 64, not 191 intersection, because then you can take advantage of all this slope that you have and not pump wastewater but once. And that would be on that, like I said, on the other side of the 64 intersection. Breaks up into sort of 4 logical service areas. Like I said, that first stretch, Bighorn Center, north to about the north end of Lazy J or Straight Iron Road. That segment's a little bit more expensive because it's a little bit more networked. It does have that bore, it does have a lift station, does have pipes on both sides of 191. So that chunk would be about, we're saying $5.3 million. And you caveat that with minus 25% plus 35%. Each subsequent section is a little bit more inexpensive because it is gravity. We are not having to reach up into these hills a long way, so our laterals are not that long. These costs to me were pleasantly surprising after reading the 2008 study. And it was all about coming down off, 1, 2, 3 MGD sorts of wastewater generation and capacity and treatment to where Mace landed, which looks like about 300,000 gallons a day. You got peaks associated with that and such, but we're talking a whole order of magnitude smaller infrastructure to get at this, so it becomes a lot more tenable. And that was, to me, a very good outcome of the planning level, or the planning part of the study. And we can come back and spend more time on cost estimates later, but I don't want to belabor them, but I want you to see them. This is what we call OM&R, so operation, maintenance, and replacement costs. The replacement aspect is how you should be funding infrastructure, so you're collecting money over the years so that you have enough money to replace that infrastructure when it's expired or no longer of use. That's how Big Sky County Water and Sewer District does it. Not everybody does that, but that's a textbook way to do it. If you don't do it that way and you need $30 million of infrastructure in 25 years to replace what you had, you're at the mercy of USDA and SRF and state and federal governments. The annual sewer collection system operation and maintenance. So this would be what the Canyon Area District would do regardless of scenario 1 or scenario 2. You would have a collection system that you would own and operate, and you'd have to pay somebody to operate that system, meaning go chase clogs, go do inspections, go do periodic cleanings, and that's the bulk of that $125,000 there. The annual depreciation and replacement budget would be about $171,000 annually that you would want to sock away so you can replace infrastructure when it starts to fail. So your total is just the sum of those, and it's about $300,000. These numbers might move a little bit between now and when we stamp this thing and put it out, but we're generally pretty close. We're not expecting any large swings at this point. So that, everybody clear, that covers the collection system that would be the Canyon Area Districts. No interaction with anybody else. But what you do with that wastewater after you collect it and get it roughly to that 64-191 intersection, there's two options. One is you build your own treatment plant as close to that intersection as possible. The upper right photo is the River Rock wastewater treatment plant that Ron operates. That's about a 200,000 gallon per day system. We're talking about a 300,000 gallon per day system, roughly in that same ballpark scale. That might be what it looks like at the end of the day, just to wrap your head around that. It is Big Sky, so we need indoor facilities, we need odor control, we need nice architecture. So costs do tend to be a little higher up here, not just for that reason, but because it's really hard to get at all these trades and get good competitive bids from contractors that are capable of building this type of stuff. This would be owned and operated by the Canyon Area District as well under scenario 1. So you are taking on wastewater treatment for the rest of, for perpetuity at that point, really. Unless one day you decide to pull the plug and you can work a deal with Big Sky at that point to take your sewer. But at this, you're staffing this, you're operating it, you're signing the discharge permits monthly, it's all yours. The water coming out of that plant would be pumped from this hypothetical location somewhere down close to 191-64, back up the canyon into rapid infiltration beds for groundwater discharge. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. We call it purple pipe. It would be, the water would be usable for other reuse practices as well. When you see this EOPTC TPC, that is engineer's opinion of total project cost. We're sitting at a little over $15 million for that facility right now. Where that site ends up and whose property and how much we'd have to pay for that property is a big piece of that. So just keep that in mind. That's why we have some of those large accuracy bands at this point. We chose the membrane bioreactor. That's where we landed for the phase 1 expansion of Ron's plant. It makes a lot of sense at this scale. Like I said, that River Rock plant's down there cranking out some great high quality water. It works really well at this footprint. You can get it indoors, and you can do just about anything with that water in terms of reuse. After you're done, it's a Class A-1, so it opens up all sorts of uses, from snowmaking to irrigation to putting it in the ground potentially. And it came out about as cost effective as SBRs, which is what Ron has now, backed by cloth filters, which would be more difficult to operate. Scenario 2, conveyance to Big Sky. So this would collect all that wastewater down at a lift station that, if it all works out, we put out in the front yard there of Conoco. We've talked to them. They're open to the concept, but this is not set in stone either. This is just feasibility level study. So we'd have to construct a lift station there that would take Canyon Area wastewater and pump it up to the Big Sky County Water and Sewer District through a force main. The opinion of cost on that right now is about $3.7 million, still within that same bandwidth that we've been talking to the resort tax about $4 million. That's all going to get asked of the voters to pay, to approve for collecting that with the 1%, and this lift station would be paid for if the voters approve. The force main would be a 12-inch main at this level, this conceptual design level, about 9,600 feet up Highway 64. That would be owned and operated as well by the Big Sky County Water and Sewer District, same as the lift station. That was part of the interlocal agreement with the resort tax. More detailed alignment study would be needed in the PER, but this is good enough for conceptual level cost estimation. And that would also be fully funded if the 1% additional resort tax is approved. Switching gears to the treated water and I'm going to cover both of these because on the same slide, but scenario one, where the canyon goes it alone, as I described, we would pump treated water from that treatment plant back up the canyon to rapid infiltration basins and reuse. If you formed a district, had an agreement with Big Sky County Water and Sewer District to take the wastewater and treat it, you would have effluent treated water coming back down the canyon. That line would be a 16-inch line with the goal of preserving as much of that pressure as we can and drive it back up the canyon for discharge to those same rapid infiltration basins and reuse accounts. So bigger pipeline, but to cut down on friction losses and save the pressure and not have to have booster stations along that pipeline. Conveyance costs, so like I said, $3.7 million on the lift station, $3 million on the force main up 64. That treated water return pipeline, 16-inch, would be approximately $10 million. It just happens to conveniently break out as about $5 million for the portion along 64 and $5 million for the portion up 191. So what we told the resort tax 2 months ago was $12 million total as a budgetary number for the lift station and the two pipelines. We're still about right there. That still works. And that's what will be put before the voters on May 5th, as well as funding 60% or $27 million of the expansion and upgrade up the hill. I'm getting waved out of here, so I'm going to quickly wrap up. Their OM&R costs for those same infrastructures. So these would be owned and operated by Big Sky County Water Sewer District, but you form a district down here, you have an interlocal agreement, you're paying them, in an ideal world, you're paying them what it costs for them to operate that system. So that would be part of your canyon area residence rate charges. And like I said, this is all going into the goal of feeding these infrastructure costs and these OM&R costs to the financial folks, who then will look at how many residents are down here, how many connections, and try to turn it into connection fees and monthly rate charges, so that you all can actually say, well, what is this really going to cost me, not what's it going to cost in total. Ron's plant, most of you in this room have sat through a presentation I've given already, so I'm not going to touch on it, but we're sitting at $35 million on the estimate. Again, resort taxes said we'll pay up to $27 million or 60% of that project cost. And that was done in large part to say, we will help you quite a bit, but we'd like to see you help get the canyon sewered and get their wastewater out of the ground and treated. That's just the latest rendering of Ron's plant. So that's what a $35 million project looks like. This, I know I'm getting waved out, but this is the thing I want to harp on here, is that, as we'll show toward the end, the capital costs of these two scenarios are pretty darn close. And so you might look at that. If you were just looking at that, you might say, well, hey, we could build our own plant and operate it. The issue is that there's huge economies of scale in not just construction of wastewater and water treatment plants, but in operations. So you're going to need, that first line item, for example, is full-time employees, operators. You can't really have one operator of a plant that's trying to generate Class A-1 wastewater. You need two. What if that one goes on vacation or gets sick? In theory, we like to do circuit riders and back each other up and share operators, but you can't plan for that at this stage. So we budget 3 down here for Ron's plant. He's doing it right now with a lot less, but by the book, that plant, when it's expanded and upgraded, would have 3 operators dedicated to it. But it's 3 times larger, but you only need 1 more person. So those are the economy of scales that I'm referring to. Same with energy and everything else. So right now, sitting at an estimate of about $800,000 a year to operate that 300,000 gallon per day plant that would be the canyons, versus maybe $1.8 million to operate that future expanded plant that Big Sky County Water and Sewer District owns and operates. But they've got 7,000 SFEs up there to help you share that cost load versus down here, you're doing it all on your backs, fewer backs. And that project needs to be built and financed from the get-go. So you're starting off with however many people you start the district with are going to have to bear that load, and you're going to be wanting more people to come on board to help you bear the costs. That's it. Question?
What's the question?
Why expand? Why not expand Big Sky County?
So the question is, why create a separate district and not just annex them in? And it really is kind of a political answer. The annexing district is totally outside of our current boundary. You have to do a vote of my entire district customer and owner base, which becomes very difficult to do. And so you put that out to a vote, and you may get, no, we don't want to annex them in. If the canyon decides to form its own district with an initial list of landowners, it's a much easier thing to organize and set up. But it's a good question.
Questions for Scott?
Or Ron? We're happy to let Ron answer all the questions.
Over there.
Scott, can you talk a little bit about disposal sites within the canyon? What those might be, what those needs would be?
Yeah, especially because May showed one right out back here. We caveat that quite a bit in there. There are many are here already that we're hoping we could take over. And when I say we, it would be you, the canyon area, versus going and building a bunch of new ones. Some of that, some building of new ones, there looks to be plenty on paper. We went up to DEQ yesterday, and it's not always as straightforward as we'd like. We're close enough to the river that we're probably going to have to do some mixing zone studies and show that we're not going to impact the river if we discharged 3-4 milligram per liter effluent into these rapid infiltration basins. And that could also factor into where we would ideally like them located. As May said, you're working towards a pinch point down there at 64 and 191 geologically. The closer we are there, the closer we are to the river. So it makes sense to push it to the southwest as much as possible. So those are not, we don't have those pinpointed. We've talked to Ram's Horn about, in theory, we'd love to have theirs. We've talked to the quarry about some sites there potentially. So there's sites, but you're going to need easements. You're going to need agreements to go on their property and maintain them. And that answer your question? Yes.
My question is about the pipes and the location of the collection system. You're talking about having it on the far side of the river, or at least the south fork that comes in, west fork that comes in. And you're crossing, and then if you have a pump station, you're crossing back again, and then you pump it up and you're crossing back again. So there's potentially 3 different lines that are going to be going under that fork of the river. So can you talk about
two lines under 191? So we would have collection on both sides, starting just below us here, down 191.
Mm-hmm.
Collection on both sides on the other side of 64 coming.
Right,
so we
cross under the river there?
It would go under 191, come over to Bighorn Center to a pump station, get pumped under the West Fork.
Yeah.
So we cross under the river once.
But then if you pump it back up to Big Sky, then you have to cross over again.
Yep.
To get there.
Yep.
So I was just questioning, why not have it all on this side? Is it you don't have land on this side? Why wouldn't you collect on this side of the West Fork and only have to cross the West Fork one if you were going up to Big Sky?
You could avoid collecting that north half of the boundary. That half would stay on septics and would stay. But
are we understanding your question right? Because we only cross the West Fork once, and it's to get Rams or Bighorn Center.
I thought you had some collection site on the far side of the West Fork. Is that what, did I read that map wrong?
We
The
do.
north, I mean, the
West Fork.
the west fork.
Yep, and it's, it's all answered with a map that we could talk through too. But we're definitely trying to minimize crossings of 191, and only doing that twice, and then only undergoing the river once for your collection system. But you're right, if we pump it up 64 and with that pipe coming back down, I believe we have 2 bores there as well. It's not easy building, but we are trying to minimize any, especially going under the rivers. And it's done, and it's, you can do it right, but it's not our favorite thing to do either.
I'm sure I know you got all the numbers in there, but it's a little confusing. Might be helpful if you had a table that showed, because you've got collection system, that needs to be standalone treatment or use Big Sky.
It's coming.
Different components. Just might be helpful to make sure we're comparing apples to apples, because
You're stealing Mace's thunder.
16 and 9, and you said
Yep.
it's coming in.
Yep. Yeah, one of our last slides, I'll pull it together, and we'll talk about it probably more than any other slide. Yeah. I decided to give him the heavy information.
Yes.
Just to follow up to her question, I don't know if I understood this, but I thought you said it would be $5 million for the collection system to pick up across.
Yeah, it's a little more complex than that. It's not just what's north of the West Fork or 64. It's that first starter hub there. I have to look at the map myself, but it comes up to roughly the quarry. So it's a big, patchwork starter collection system. That's why.
The first slide where you said it was $5 million for that section, because then later you said the pump station up to the sewer district was $1 million.
No, sorry. 3.7 for the pump station, and that's because it's on that triangular wedge in front of Conoco. It's going to have to be really nice and look nice. And,
so I guess I didn't understand, but then what was the $5 million one for? Like one of your very first slides.
The $5 million is for that first starter collection system. So what we call it service area 1 or area 1.
Hopefully Mason's going to help us out with
Summon this up. Yeah. Yep.
Great expectations.
Questions now, I can talk a bit about the maps too. And Scott, you want to briefly go over the decentralized, maybe pick up a little bit, might be good for people.
I'm catching that one too in a second.
You'll catch it, okay,
Yeah.
great.
Is there an infiltration system? What are options of that? Is that landscaping? Is it?
The more you landscape it, the less capacity you have generally. I mean, the highest capacity would be a cobble rock drain bed, essentially.
Well, I meant for using for irrigation. Like can we irrigate football fields at the school? Is that a use, or are you talking about injecting into the groundwater, and how does that happen?
Both. We could do both. Putting it in the ground is going to require some more study and some more science, but irrigating ball fields is fine. I mean, that's done all over the U.S.
So I have a question. So this is required because of growth, not because of where we are, or is it because of growth?
That gets to that whole discussion of tipping points. Are we a problem right now? We don't know. MBMG's launching in to help us understand that a little better. But as it grows, surely. And, a lot of that's already platted.
Are we at that point now?
You're asking a treatment engineer. That's for the groundwater folks.
We've seen increasing levels of nitrogen in groundwater wells in the Canadian over time. So we're definitely having.
And are those wells are those like dug wells that are close to the surface, or are these like 300-foot wells or both.
Mike?
These are, the increasing trends are mostly in shallow wells in the shallow consolidated aquifer, so.
And what's
wells that
shallow
are
in your?
40 to 50 feet.
Okay.
Well, bedrock's at 40 feet.
Right, well, that's why I was wondering. So we're talking about the wells that are shallow,
Not ransomware.
Steve, did you have a point?
I was just going to comment earlier that the recent algae boom kind of is sort of the handwriting on the wall. I mean, if we're not there, we seem to be in the vicinity, given the right conditions, which took place that summer.
Yeah, I mean, we can get at that 4,600 pounds right now. Where that 4,600 pounds goes from here is also a concern. Okay.
Quickly scroll back and see if I can answer that service area concept. I don't know if I can quite read it. I would say that that 5 million number is roughly the purple pipe plus T4, I think is right here. That purple pipe to Bighorn is that base to the infrastructure that's telling them 5 million.
So the 3.7, is that just the lift station or is that the pipe? Does it seem significantly further to get it on?
So keep in mind that one set of costs was collection. This one's 100% collection, nothing above the lift station, nothing above the lift station to Big Sky Wastewater.
So that 3.7 is just for the lift station?
Yes, correct.
Correct. Like I said, that's deep lift station right there in front of Conoco. It's a tough place to build on, and it would have to have nice architecture, odor control. We like to do dry pit lift stations where the pumps aren't actually submerged in the wastewater, so that's a nice lift station. But it is actually shorter from the intersection to the Big Sky County Water and Sewer District's plant than it is from that intersection to the high school. It's tougher to install a pipeline in that 64 corridor than it is in 191, so that's why it's kind of a balance of 5 million each.
If you're trying to track down that 5 million compared to the $12 million vote, I will note that this treated water pipeline includes the purple pipeline from the intersection down to these disposal sites that I'll show you in a while. So there is a $5 million component that isn't part of that lift station conveyance back and forth. So decentralized treatment. We recognize that there's portions of this valley that are going to be very tough to collect, not economical to extend main. Corral Bar, Rainbow Lodge, every linear foot of pipe costs money. So to take chips off of these nutrient loads, decentralized treatment is a strategy. We did our homework on what we think are two solutions that we would vouch for. On my drive up, I was thinking I should add a Montana made stamp because these are Montana technologies. Septic Net out of Butte. It's essentially leading edge, decentralized, non-mechanical treatment, getting effluent down into the 5 to 7 range. That quality of effluent comes at a cost. 5,000 GPD system, which I characterize as you'd probably need 5 of those for Ramshorn, 4 maybe, because that's all off a design flow, not average. So it's not cheap, but it knocks out a lot of nitrogen load, taking essentially incoming effluent at 60 milligrams per liter and knocking it down to the 5-7 range. Applying it to this scale of system, if there's a 5,000 GPD standard system out there, you're able to knock out, I think it's in one of the tech memos, I think it was 800 pounds a year at $542 capital cost for that first year poundage, and you're knocking those pounds out for the life of that technology. Next Montana-made technology, treatment wetlands. Chris Allen, Otto Stein, they worked with MSU for about a decade, proving these concepts out. This is up in Bridger Bowl. It's about a 10,000 GPD system you see in the picture there. And it's worked under the harshest conditions of extreme ski hill loading in dead of winter, so coming in at high loads. Cost estimate for, or I guess performance, you can see it's roughly triple the nitrogen of, say, the septic net in terms of the effluent quality, but it's at a little less than half the cost, and we're knocking out 318 pounds per nitrogen removed a year. So for these areas that aren't ideal for central collection, it's a way to knock that load out. For a district, it's not a traditional method of chipping off a bunch and having a district own a bunch of drain fields and decentralized. A district solution is really central collection, central treatment, and the quality of an MBR is 3 or 4, and you're setting yourself up for handling mass collection in the future. So that's kind of the differentiator between the two treatment concepts. So I'm going to get into disposal now. Little rundown on this graph. This is roughly existing load. We did some mass balance work. We were looking at some stream data upstream of the canyon at roughly the Buck station. We've got this natural load concept of spring runoff carries some nutrients. You've got high flows. So this blue represents a natural load bar that climbs as you hit spring runoff, falls down, and hits kind of more of a base flow from August on. The orange is the unnatural load, what we were tallying up as, if we take that 4,600 pounds, spread it across on a monthly basis, that's how it stacks up on the natural load. And in the existing setting, that load is basically a chronic load, so it is pretty equalized and loading the stream pretty evenly throughout the year. And the trouble point is really your late summer, August, September base flows where temperatures are high, and that's probably when you're likely seeing algae bloom. So that's where the river's most sensitive to your load, and it is actually one of the flaws of groundwater discharge is that is a chronic load. But if you say we knock out 90% of that load, you're chipping that little orange thing to a sliver under existing conditions. So that factor of timing and load played into how we were looking at our disposal options. Post-treatment nutrient abatement or removal. Aquifer provides some denitrification benefits, dilution benefits. Phosphorus, one of the other primary nutrients of concerns, is predominantly fully absorbed to the subsurface, and at these treatment rates, phosphorus is really out of the picture for groundwater discharge. It'd be locked up in the substrate. Snowmaking does have the same denitrification benefits, dilution benefits. It would run off as a pulse discharge, which has its benefits in that load would largely be out of the system by July if sited right, which would be a benefit to the stream. You are losing the aquifer recharge element because those base flows are valuable. The volume of water is valuable, but pulsing it out of the system before temperatures rise and base flows drop is a plus. Snowmaking does have agronomic uptake benefits, and then there's agronomic uptake benefits for land application or irrigation reuse. So those are really where I'm focusing on disposal solutions. The heavy lifter that you'll see is groundwater disposal. I did want to note receiving water sensitivity. I really see it as August, September, but there's a nutrient period of July 1st to September 30th is where DEQ is really stringent on what's making it to the river. So yeah, down here, August is kind of what I focus on, and you can see at August the load is roughly double background, I guess, or anthropogenic. I gotta keep cranking and I'll catch answers at the end. This is our screening table. I'm not gonna cover it all, but I do want to emphasize we did look at surface water, we did look at groundwater, snowmaking, land application, deep injection wells, shallow injection wells. From a overall benefit, overall setting, we're thinking groundwater discharge is cost effective, has nutrient benefits, has recharge benefits, and at the quality of that, we're pulling X pounds out and putting less pounds in. That's a plus. Supplementary, as Scott described, we're planning on a purple pipe main that essentially feeds these drain field locations. That main's available to use for irrigation reuse. Maybe there's opportunities where snowmaking's wanted for a cross-country course or for cross-country skiing, and there's a duplicate benefit. We did identify that snowmaking as a fundamental mechanism to dispose is maintenance intensive, operation intensive, and isn't a large reliable disposal. It can be done at a price, and if you get dual recreation benefits out of your snow, then it really starts to be intriguing. We're not taking it off the table. We see applications where it's supplementary. Question marks on surface water discharge and shallow injection wells. I put those there as they're still intriguing to me. Surface water, not really in scenario one where the canyon's going alone, because that would require large storage to store through that sensitive period of the river. Whereas the co-solution, or the scenario two, where the storage exists and you could potentially pulse discharge out with spring runoff, that's out of the system, 100% moved on. There are phosphorus concerns of, does that translate downstream? And that's the beauty of the aquifer, is phosphorus is eliminated. So still a cost-effective disposal if the storage exists. Pulse discharges, talking to DEQ yesterday, they seemed intrigued and saw the benefit, but point discharges through rivers are challenging. Where am I at, Karen? Okay. So disposal infrastructure, I'm going to present essentially both scenarios on the same slide. And like Scott mentioned, we're showing conceptual locations. So the fact that one of those is shown right out here off Bucks T4, that's purely conceptual, but we did identify all the orange is existing drain fields. Given the quality of this effluent, the loading to those drain fields can be approximately triple of what they can do today. Right now, they're trying to dispose of unpolished effluent, I'd say higher BOD, total nitrogen in the 20 to 30 range. So the loading to those is more conservative under current operation. With the polished scenario, Ramshorn send upwards of 115,000 GPD to those three drain fields. Lazy J has a system in place. We're calculating, I think existing, it's designed for 20,000. We're confident it can do 50,000. And then those would be kind of those first opportunities to use infrastructure to dispose of a lot of effluent without much cost. The caveat to that is piping to each of these drain fields is the big number in this whole disposal. And this is where that $5 million was actually in the collection system cost. So we've already captured that, but it is a notable component when you're looking at disposal. We're showing auxiliary recharge. I'm defining pink as gallery and blue as recharge basin. And the difference is the gallery is subsurface. You have landscape on top. It can be common space. It can be used for multiple purposes. Performs great during the winter. The cost per gallon disposed is quite a bit more, actually a little bit more than double of a recharge basin, which is surface loaded. Belgrade currently uses them. I don't know if that same River Rock subdivision has rapid infiltration basins, but on a cost per gallon disposed, surface or recharge basins can dispose a lot of effluent. These are conceptual locations. There is an alternative of identifying a single central area that could do it all and eliminate a lot of that piping cost. But there's the beauty of getting it down to that southern end of the aquifer where it's broader, deeper, better recharge, and we're getting better distribution across this whole network. So to centralize it into a single location, yeah, there's a cost benefit, but it's a land challenge too. Take up a big chunk of land, and then it would be a more localized point source. So in our cost, we're basically going with this methodology presented on that figure, and the cost difference between the two scenarios is, I don't know if I tally that up at the end. Yeah. So this is where we get into total cost. Focused on disposal, the go-it alone is $6.1 million. The co-solution of is $6.9 million. And that is, the reason that number climbs is the concept there is to take more effluent than is being sent up. So the canyon is addressing some of the existing district's disposal challenges. For example, rather than pumping it all the way up to Spanish Peaks and that energy intensive, let's gravity feed it down and still have a net nutrient reduction. So the number climbs, but it's also doing probably twice the work, depending on how all things shake out. So as a total summary, this is capital cost only. We've got scenario 1 on the left. The boards are in the back. You can soak them up after the talk. Go it alone with wastewater treatment plant. Somewhere up here, we're showing it just roughly where Canyon Noble is, but somewhere at the north end is ideal. The coast solution scenario, more drain fields and sending effluent up the valley. The Canyon area treatment at $29.8 million capital cost. The coast solution scenario 2 at $26.2 million cost. So that's that total summary cost you guys were looking for.
The 26.2 at the bottom does not include treatment at the Big Sky County Water and Sewer District's plant, because we need the rate study impact fee folks who specialize in that to help us figure out what share the Canyon would have of that project cost. So like I said, the current estimate for that plant is $35 million. The resort tax is put it in front of the voters to pay for up to $27 million of it. So in theory, leaving $9 million to be paid for by people coming and asking for that capacity. So that's a number we have to work through in March with those folks. That's why it's a placeholder. So that 26.2 there is not the total end of the story.
We're not apples to apples yet. This is capital costs, and there's other dynamics to this when it comes to operation and agreements. And I think that was my summer, or essentially where I was stopping, but recognizing what Scott just said in terms of a rate studies forthcoming to translate these capital costs to user fees and what it looks like under the whole funding package. Big chunk of that funding package is that upcoming May vote for the additional 1%. I did want to close out to emphasize district formation. There is an urgency in terms of if this is going to get off the ground, it probably has to happen sooner than later. If developers start throwing infrastructure in the ground, septic nets or their own decentralized, their own treatment plants, those are sunk costs that you're fighting an uphill battle, or those costs aren't there to help carry this district or set the foundation. And also, as those developments come in and subdivide, the challenge of forming a district may be a lost opportunity. So there is an emphasis to timeliness. In the district formation tech memo that was posted on the website, you'll see that emphasis of expedited formation is recommended. And if it delays a year, 2 years, I think the challenge of central collection treatment is going to be a tougher lift. So that's all I got.
Is there an advantage to having smaller systems, given we're in a seismic area, if something catastrophic happens?
Question is, advantage to smaller system for seismic. I guess it is a one-stop failure mechanism where if you're distributing that load, the risk is less, but I don't see it as a huge deterrent risk to push you decentralized. Scott?
and this is built to handle that type of building.
I couldn't hear the second part of the question.
I'm mumbling it. It's built to a code that would accommodate
Oh yeah,
seismic area.
yeah, definitely. It's very expensive and it's a pain in the butt, and that's why we have. You go to these treatment plants, the walls of the basins are 2 feet thick now, and they get thicker every decade because of structural code changes. So all the infrastructure that we put in the canyon would have to meet that. And to your point, yeah, if there was an earthquake and major earthquake that knocked out 5 of 7 regional systems, then no. But if it only knocked out 1 or 2 of them, but knocked out a plant, yeah, that's bad. But that plant was cranking out better quality effluent in most cases, if not all cases, for the time before that and after that. So it's kind of a tough comparison to make.
Steve?
smaller distributed systems have diseconomies of scale
Yeah,
too.
that's
Another-
basically that decentralized aspect. I recommend that as areas that aren't suitable for central collection, because those central collection is setting the backbone for the economy of scale. And yeah, that's the value of central collection and treatment.
Yeah, I guess it was outside the scope of the study, but did you consider climate change impacts on stream flows over the life of this project? And the reason I asked that question is this: even if Big Sky did grow by one more person over the next 20 years,
Base flow is going
climate
down.
change, base flows are going to be lower, water temperatures are going to be higher. Therefore, the same amount of nitrogen that's put in the river 20 years from now is going to cause much greater impacts.
That is beyond our scope, but I hear you that threshold, even though we're maybe good on the threshold today, as base flows drop and temperatures climb, that threshold's going to go down with it. So
The reason I made that observation is in response to this gentleman's question earlier, which is a really good one, is why are we doing this? And I think the need to reduce nutrient loading is going to be even greater in the future than it is today because of this.
yeah, and it's tough to turn the dial back and pull loads out, and this would be kind of doing that. So, Lori.
So I have a question. The $5 million to get the pipe after Area 1 down to Area 5, a possibility that their 1% resort tax could pick that up, since they're picking up the $12 million pipe plus Area 1. But my question is to Ron, I know you're upgrading your system, but will you have the capacity to take through Area 5 if we decide that the pipe goes down? Will you have the capacity to take the rest of us on?
There's a few pieces. So the question was, and Lori lived in Ramshorn, she wrote a letter to the editor, which many of you probably saw. So there's two pieces to that question. One is, do we have enough treatment capacity? The second one is, what do you do with the water once it's gone through treatment? And where do you dispose of that? The work these engineers are doing to identify disposal and disposal areas in the canyon is a real critical piece of that. We don't fully know how much disposal capacity there is down. The early indications are that it looks very encouraging. We don't want to do all this to take 100,000 gallons a day from the canyon and then turn around and only be able to put 100,000 gallons back. Because we've got all of Big Sky to contend with, and so we're hoping that there's more disposal than just what the canyon needs to be. And the second piece is, what can you run through your treatment plant? What Scott and AE2S and his cohorts are working on is phase 1 of this treatment plant. And then there's a phase 2 to that plant that we all are thinking, in my board especially, that we're going to have to build that sooner rather than later, just because of this project and just the way Big Sky is growing.
So,
and I don't know if you guys want to add to that.
If you formed a district and you got everybody, Mesa's figured out that it's roughly 100,000 gallons a day. And I don't think that would happen, but if you suddenly had 100,000 gallons a day to pump up to his plant, you would take up over a third of his new capacity that he's building for $35 million. So in theory, yeah, they could take it, but it's going to force them really quickly into a phase 2 project that will be less expensive because we're setting it up so that it makes that phase 2 easier, because it's obviously coming. But
so areas 2 through 5 will need to wait, one, until this is paid for in 6 to 7 years, if we want to use the one.
No, it doesn't have to be paid for. It would be part of an expansion. You don't have to pay for one before you start another one.
I was told you did, and that we would need to go back in front of Mr. Johnson.
Steve.
Steve, and we would have to go back in front of
Good friend Steve.
So I guess I'm just wondering, Area 1, or Section 1 is going to be done immediately.
I think what he was talking about, the work we've done with the resort, we've had this collaborative effort, is really good. We think we could pay their share, which is based on 60% of the cost of a $35 million treatment, within 6 years based on current cost.
Correct, that's
So
correct. So if the rest of the $5 million pipe from 2 to 5 wants to use 1% money, we need to wait until it's paid back But it sounds like we also need to wait until your capacity goes.
No, I just said it's 100,000 gallons per day right now. The phase one expansion, which will be done in 2022, which you couldn't move that fast anyway, they could take you. That phase one expansion would be able to take that 100,000 gallons per day.
So we just need to wait $5 million.
And I'll let Steve or Danny comment on the 1% and, you know, when you can do it.
Steve?
Let me take myself out of that one.
I need a big shovel.
1% is authorized by the voters for a specific project, dollar amount, and time frame. And so we can implement the 1% if the voters approve, but when the project is done and the money is spent, the 1% terminates. So if we want to use any more, we have to go back to the voters a second time. So yes, it kind of needs to be paid off, but you know, we would expect, although God knows what's going to happen with coronavirus, we would expect with growth around here, we would be able to pay that off sooner than we think. We'll see. But once it's paid off, then that 1% is the only way we can implement it again is by taking again an issue to the voters and saying, do you want to do this?
And we've got this agreement with the resort tax, which basically the 1% goes through. We're not in the 3% pool for anything. But a new district down here could be. So there's a second piece of this where the 3% money certainly could be available for an ask from the Canyon project. So it's totally independent of what we're doing.
Well, and an established water and sewer district down here qualifies for all kinds of cheap money.
Yeah, you can go to USDA, Lori, and they will look at your costs. And if they deem them that that's not affordable, they'll help you out. Or they're meant to.
After the conversation, last year we received 11.5 million requests and we had roughly 8 million bid. So there's not just lump sums of money that are sitting around. However, if a district were to be formed, you would have the ability as an official entity to be able to apply. Can we skip back to the last slide there?
Sure. And it's a great story that you're telling USDA when you're sewer in an unsewered area that could be potentially reaching the Gallatin River.
So if I'm looking at this correctly, the lift station and conveyance dollars, the $11.7 million, that's really what we're talking about, 1% vote, as it's particularly related to the Canyon district. So that wasn't quite clear to me.
In theory, with that funding, that 26.2 drops by 11.7.
And just a further detail on that, in order to get that on the ballot for May, we've already had to submit ballot language that describes that explicit scenario. And if we want to do something different, I don't think we can use.
No,
that
you
vote.
can't.
So,
No. You can't. But to Danny's point, we couldn't treat it like that because what if the vote doesn't happen? So we got to treat it as apples to apples.
But you got a $14 million gap, even if we get the 1%.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But more, what I was trying to hammer home earlier is the goat alone is on the backs of, even at full build out, maybe 1,000 population, or excuse me, 1,000 population equivalents. Bottom one is on the back of what, Ron, 6,500 SFEs right now, going quickly to 10,000 SFEs. So you got a lot of help paying for that bottom portion. Up top, you're fighting as a Canyon district alone.
Just a sidebar to that, we've got a lot of current debt from almost $30 million worth of projects that we've done in my 25 years here that will be paid off within the next 5 years. So we've got, the 1% really dovetails in well with this project and the timing because all this other debt will be gone within 5 years. And then to assume more after that, the effect to our customer base really is negligible. They're already seeing that debt now, which would be going away.
What would it be?
Be new debt.
Otherwise, though, and that's what regulators.
Well, this is all tax debt. So
But without the 60%.
Oh, it would, I mean, Scott looked at that, it would double our sewer.
We're back of the envelope, we're seeing somewhere around doubling, if not a little more, on rates, revenue to pay for that $35 million.
In the water and sewer district. And my board is committed to build this new plant. They do not want to stop and say, we can't afford it, can't do it. They want to keep going. And obviously the 1% is a huge help, and this expansion into the canyon also works for them. But it's not, they're not interested in stopping and just waiting for this money to show up, build it. So we've been committed to keep charging.
Yeah, they really can't. I mean, we're going to try to get that plant started up
2022.
just ahead of meeting those SFEs at this growth rate. Steve said there's unforeseen things happening that could slow growth down a little bit, but they need the plant regardless of all of this.
One more question, then we can mingle afterwards. I know Scott. Okay, well, two more questions. Okay, Mike first.
You know, if I take Steve right, with this ballot, really only scenario 2 gets access to the $10 million if you're in the canyon. Scenario 1 does not have that funding in this ballot and such. So just so people understand that that is only about this ballot only makes that money available for scenario 2.
I do have some optimism that scenario 2, the sum of the parts, I think the marriage is probably there. But yeah,
I'm just saying.
Yeah, but you recognize.
Don't get hung up with thinking about one too much unless you know where else to get $10 million. Right?
Yeah, no, I hear you. Scott, last question, then we got to mingle.
You know, I know you said in the bottom scenario there that there would be additional expenses for treatment for Big Sky treating the water, but wouldn't there also be a benefit to the Canyon District for taking the extra effluent from Big Sky down to there, maybe to help offset that?
There's a cost benefit there that is intriguing. How you put those dollars to the treatment cost versus the saved disposal cost up in that world. We don't have those numbers in front of us, and that's kind of where that next step, form the district or talk about or start to get it around the table with the existing district, and ideally form the district so we can really hash out details and get progress.
Can I add one clarifying point there? Within the interlocal agreement that the resort tax and water and sewer district have, in the event a district is not formed in the canyon, that piece of the project is null and void and will not happen essentially. Correct? You need an entity to actually enter into an agreement with.
There's a timeline associated.
What was it,
2022, I think. 3 years. 3 years.
Yeah.
Karen, do we have to eat cookies and coffee?
Thank you guys so much. We're going to move to the part where police talk to the engineers, each other, move to the maps. I put some post-its and pens. That's 2, Ron. First. And please write comments, inputs, and if you haven't signed in, please sign in. This is how I get a hold of you.